Hello, guys. So, thank you so much for your hard work on Western European absolutism yesterday. I think I'm actually going to need to kind of extend out our analysis of absolutism outside of Western Europe for 2 days instead of the one that I had initially scheduled. So you'll see that I've changed that a little bit on the blog for today. Part of that is because normally what I have you guys do for this unit is I have you do a project where at the end you have to do sort of a simulation and interact with each other on the basis of your research, but that's not something we can really do in our current circumstance. So, excuse me. So that means that we have to kind of reassess how we're doing this. And that means I've got to kind of figure out what the pacing is going to be on the fly. So I am going to add in a second day of absolutism outside of the West. Today, we are going to be talking about the Muslim empires from about the 16th to 18th centuries, collectively known as the Gunpowder Empires. So, the Gunpowder Empires, first of all, that's a cool name for a collection of empires. There are three of them, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. You probably have heard of the Ottomans. I doubt you've heard of the Mughals, and I'm pretty sure you've never heard of the Safavids. So, this is the part of the world that we're addressing today. The area closest to Western Europe, right here, centered around Turkey, around Anatolia. This area is, of course, the Ottoman Empire, and we're going to find that this area is under the same political control, theoretically at least, up until 1922. That is after World War One. And then this purplish area right here, that is the Safavid Empire. And here over in India, this region over here is the Mughal Empire. And you will notice that this area, essentially, we have seen historically, was home to a lot of trade routes, right? So you had like the Silk Roads came directly through this area. Well, part of the reason why European exploration initiated was because Europeans had poor relations with Muslim populations following the Crusades. And so if they wanted to get to, say, India to buy cinnamon or cardamom or a million other delicious spices, then they had to go overland directly through Muslim territory, or they had to find an alternate route. And that's what kind of prompted European maritime exploration. So the Gunpowder Empires are well known and called that because they are militaristic. They have a modern military, modern for the 16th to 18th centuries, that is. They used professional soldiers. They didn't conscript soldiers. You had professional soldiers. People rose through the ranks. And they were all Muslim. Now, collectively, these areas are called the Gunpowder Empires, and they include, like I said, the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal. So I'm going to go through each one, and I'm going to start closest to Western Europe, and then we'll end with India. So let's talk first and foremost about the Ottoman Empire. Now, what this map is showing is it's showing the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. Initially, this dark brown territory right here, and then the surrounding orange area, was everything that the Ottoman Turks controlled. And it wasn't until the 1400s, 14th century, that you started to see them really expand around the Black Sea, and then starting moving into what is today Iraq, and over here into the former Byzantine Empire. Now you'll notice that they are right in the area that used to be the Byzantine territory. So that means that the Ottoman Empire is going to overlay a lot of Christian territory. So, first and foremost, I would point out the dates. The Ottoman Empire lasts almost 7 centuries. It is a long-lasting empire. And initially, it was founded by a group of Turkic semi-nomadic pastoralists who were allied with Seljuk Turks. And remember, the Seljuk Turks had conquered Jerusalem, and that conquest of Jerusalem and other holy cities that were important to Jewish and Christian populations back in the 9th century was one of the major reasons for the Crusades beginning in the 11th century, or 10th century, my apologies. No? 11th, my apologies. So this Turkic group in particular, like many other Turkic groups, were Sunni. They'd been exposed to Islam under the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate. They were initially nomadic, and because they fought on the sides of the Seljuks, once the Seljuks had seized control of some territory from the Byzantines, they were granted a little bit of that territory. Now, the Seljuks didn't fare very well as a result of the Crusades, but the Ottomans do. So this Turkic group, initially it's just kind of a collection of family clans. The empire really begins under the rule of a leader by the name of Osman I. His name becomes slightly Latinized and adopted in Western Europe to become the foundation of the name Ottoman. So Osman is the root for Ottoman. I know it doesn't sound like it, but just like take it on faith, it does. Once Osman takes over, he starts actively taking territory and seizing control of cities, and then rather than just like raiding them and moving on, they settle. The Turks settle down, they become agriculturalists, and they began expanding their territory. So the Ottoman territory grows as the Byzantine Empire collapses. It's sort of like hungry, hungry hippos. So, like, the Byzantine Empire loses control of its marbles and the Ottomans just gobble them up. So, one of the areas where the Byzantines really had a hard time controlling territory were the Balkans. So the Balkans are just to the north of Greece. It's really mountainous. People there are a mixture of different faiths. They're Eastern Orthodox, they're Catholic, and they spoke a bunch of different languages. So they didn't really have a cohesive identity. And that made them easier for the Ottomans to conquer. The Byzantines didn't have a good control over that territory. So the Ottomans conquer into the Balkans, which has a really diverse population of Christian and non-Christian populations. Some people chose to convert to Islam, some people adamantly refused. And the Ottomans were smart enough to realize that if they tried to force people into conversion, they would wind up with lots and lots of revolts, and that was just not something that they wanted to do. So they had a degree of religious tolerance. Non-Muslims were allowed to practice their faith if they were Christian or if they were Jewish. You couldn't be polytheistic, but very few people in this region were by then. But you did have to pay an additional tax. Now, depending on who the Sultan was at the time, the tax was either higher or lower, but it usually wasn't terrible. And usually, non-Muslim religious communities were left to govern themselves, so long as they paid their taxes on time, and so long as they didn't violate any foundational law of the empire, they were kind of left to do their own thing. So it wasn't a really horrible situation to be in if you were Catholic or if you were Eastern Orthodox, or if you were Jewish living in the Ottoman Empire. However, there is one really interesting policy that the Ottomans involved themselves in, and those are the use of janissaries. So you'll remember I said that the Ottoman Empire, as one of the Gunpowder Empires, was marked by having a professional military, and that is true. What the Ottomans did was they wanted a military that was based on skill and competence and nothing else. They didn't want it to be based on like family and kinship ties, because Ottoman culture was really tribal. It was really based around clans and families. And so they were afraid that if the military was too tied into individual families, you would have all sorts of like, backstabbing and assassinations, and it would just be really unprofessional. So what they did was the core fighting force of the Ottoman Empire were called janissaries, and they were drawn from Christian communities, not Turkic Muslim communities, always from Christian communities. What would happen is the Ottoman Empire would go to a Christian town in the Balkans, and they would say, here is the thing we require of you. We want 10% of your male children under the age of 12. Or whatever the percentage was for that particular village. And families would be forced to give up their sons under the age of 12. Now, that sounds horrific, and emotionally it certainly was, because, families had to give up their children. But children who were taken as a result of this were educated to the very best ability of the empire. They were taken to the capital city, to Istanbul. They were given essentially a royal education, which was paid for by the state. They were technically slaves, but slavery in the Ottoman Empire worked weird because you got paid. It's a very weird system of slavery. So these young boys from Christian families would be taken as slaves directly owned by the Sultan, and they would be educated. They would be raised by local Muslim families in Istanbul. They'd be converted to Islam. And the boys would then, based on their performance at school, be like kind of siphoned in two areas. Boys who were really good at, say, scholarly pursuits, and good at record keeping and things like that would go into the government. They formed the bureaucracy. And the boys who were physically adept and really good at strategy became Janissaries, and they became this elite fighting force. They were highly trained. They didn't rise through the ranks on the strength of their families because their family had no status in the Ottoman Empire. And this process was called the devshirme, and it was really effective. And it was so effective, in fact, that some Christian families would voluntarily give up their children to the state because the kids' lives were really good in terms of their health and their well-being afterwards. You just got separated from your family and might be asked to put down rebellions in your own hometown afterwards. So it's a mixed bag, but it was very effective for the Ottomans. Ultimately, by using this core of Janissaries, the Ottomans developed one of the finest militaries of the 15th and 16th century. This allowed them to conquer the Byzantine Empire capital of Constantinople in 1453, and that kills the Byzantine Empire. It's been around since 495, and it finally dies 1,000 years later. But the Ottoman Empire is characterized by its expansion, and the emperor most responsible for that expansion is without a doubt Suleiman I, or Suleiman the Lawgiver, or Suleiman the Magnificent, depending on which name you want to go with. Suleiman is a Turkic variation on the name Solomon, which, if you're familiar with your Old Testament or Talmudic studies, you might know as a wise king from sort of the Judeo-Christian tradition. So Suleiman was a very, very canny leader. He codified the Ottoman legal system. He was a really brilliant military genius, and in fact actually was able to conquer territory as far to the west as Austria. In fact, he actually surrounded the city of Vienna in Austria, and nearly brought it down. And that was kind of like a wake-up call to Western Europe that, hey, here's this modern military force from the East. They're Muslim, they're not Christian, and they are on the same level, and Western Europe had best be paying attention to them. So the Ottoman Empire was a threat to Western Europe, but it was also a threat to some of its other neighbors. So here's an example of some Ottoman Empire art. They did a lot of really beautiful decorative tile work. This is an illuminated manuscript. It's a portraiture in miniature in Ottoman books and all sorts of stuff. And this is not the Hagia Sophia, even though you might think it is. It looks an awful lot like it, and it's in the same city. This is the Mosque Suleymaniye, and it was built under Suleiman the Magnificent. And it is meant to reference the Hagia Sophia, but it's even bigger than it's sometimes called the Blue Mosque, as you can tell from the roof, but it's even bigger than the Hagia Sophia. So, oh, I'm sorry about the random little bullet points there. Just kind of ignore it for a moment. So, like I said, the Ottoman Empire didn't just prove to be a threat to the powers to the west. It was also a threat to a power to the east. And that power in particular was the Safavid Empire. I'm going to stop here and move into the next video.